QuickBooks Pro Plus Desktop 2022 OneNote presentation, manual payroll setup. Let's get into it with Intuit's QuickBooks Pro Plus Desktop 2022. If you have access to OneNote, would like to follow along, icon left-hand side, topic introductions, 6420, set up manual payroll. Also take a look at the immersive reader tool, topic introductions in the text area too, same name, same number, but with transcripts. Transcripts that can be translated into multiple languages and either listened to or read in them. Same name and numbers, presentations as well, topic introductions designed to give an introduction to the topic. Provide screenshots, links where applicable, give accounting background to complement the presentations and can be used to follow along with the presentations if you don't have access to the software at that time. Closing the icon on the left-hand side, we're starting off with the screenshot of the home page. We're focusing down here at the bottom section, that being the payroll section. You'll note that it has been turned on in some way, shape, or form. If you have this nice little arrow down below, there's multiple kind of payrolls that you can set up. It's typically an add-on type of feature, but we here are going to be setting up the manual payroll, perfect for practice, but not something you want to typically use in practice, given the fact that payroll is one of those areas that has so many components to it that it's easy to kind of mess up, and you would like to have to double check the internal control of having the software help you give you that internal control as you do the data input into the system. But the manual payroll is great for practice. You were going to turn it on by going to the edit dropdown into the preferences. We have turned it on in prior presentations, but we'll review the payroll process and go a little bit further in setting it up. Within the preferences, we're turning on the full payroll. We're checking off the manual payroll here. It will give you a pop-up asking if you want to purchase the add-on feature of payroll, remembering that your options are to do the payroll in QuickBooks system or possibly to pay for payroll in a third-party system outside of QuickBooks, possibly an ADP or a Paychex, and then just take that information and put it into the QuickBooks system solely for the presentation purposes of the financial statement, using the third party to help you to do all the payroll obligations and human resources and so on, which is another common option that you want to consider. We then have the pay stub voucher printing options, the workers' compensation, the sick and vacation information, and then the information down here, which is the copy earnings detail from previous paycheck, recall quantity field on paychecks. These are the default settings. Recall hour field on the paychecks, job costing and item tracking for paycheck expenses. And then we got the display first name and last name and the employee defaults. These are in essence the default settings within the preferences. If we click on, I believe, the pay stub and voucher printing, you have these options within there. Employee address, company address, these are in essence the default settings. Pay period and check memo, vacation used and vacation available, sick used, legal company name, federal employer identification, DBA, doing business as company name, and so on and so forth. These are in essence the default checkings after turning on the manual payroll. If you go to the list drop down and look at the payroll items, then we have the payroll items that have been set up as we turned on the manual payroll, which will help us to process the payroll. Notice some of those items include the taxes, some of the rates being applied for us. We're basically looking at the federal withholdings because the federal withholdings are going to be uniform across the entire United States and they can be more easily approximated. So we have the federal unemployment giving us the rate, the Medicare company side and employee side, Social Security company and employee. Those are more of a flat taxes, so they can give us those taxes. Remember that the federal withholding, you see that doesn't have a rate here because that's a progressive tax. That's the one that employees will then get the W-2 and have to report it on the 1040 and so on. So we need the form W-4 to help us with that calculation. That's one of the big complications, which it's very nice to have a check figure on to help us to input, which would be done by paying for payroll or possibly using a third party to kind of help us process it. We would also have to set up the state information, which could differ from state to state and locality to locality. We're now in the Employee Center, which you can go from the drop-down employees to the Employee Center. We don't have any employees set up yet at this time. We're going to add an employee, Adam Hamilton. We're adding the data down below. Pretty similar to the data for a customer or vendor in terms of the address, contact information, and so on. But you see this information to the right, disability, I-9, military, more information that you would have then in the customer field. We got the marital status, often not going to be given in the customers or vendors section. Then if we go to the address and content, we have to implement the address because that's going to be something that will be required of us when we process the W-2s and so on. Then we're going to the payroll information, this being the most confusing component. We need to set up a payroll item. The typical two items are going to be hourly wages and salary wages. We're going to set up the salary wages for our first employee here. So salary wages. We're going to say next. It's going to be regular pay. That's the type of pay. It's going to be salary. That'll be the name of the item that's going to be used in order for us to process this. And when we process the payroll, it's going to be going to payroll expenses. That'll be the expense account as we process the payroll for the salary pay. So now we have the item of the salary pay. We got $55,000 a year. Now we're going to go to the taxes item up top. On the taxes, we got the W-4 information that we have to put in place, the filing status. This is going to help us especially with the withholdings for the federal income tax, the more complex item, the allowances, the extra withholdings, and they're subject to Medicare, Social Security, and the federal unemployment tax. This is the W-4 or a copy of the W-4 where you would get most of this information from as you're setting up the information, the W-4 being filled out by the employee, then used to enter the data into the system. So then if we scroll down, we got the state information. We're going to try not to enter any state information here so we can keep it generic just on the federal side because, of course, the states will vary from state to state, locale to locale. So we'll just focus on the Fed to get an idea of the concept. Many states will follow along doing a similar mirroring of the process of what is done on the federal side. There is Adam Hamilton in our employee center. So the first employee has been set up. We're going to add another employee, which is going to be Erica Smith. Same kind of detailed information and the personal information. Address for Erica living in Beverly Hills 90210. We made up that address. And then in the payroll, we're going to say that Erica's hourly. So we have to set up a separate item because the last one was on salary. So it's now going to be an hourly wages. We're going to have regular pay. And then it's going to be hourly is going to be what the item is called. And then we have the payroll expenses. That's going to be the expense account that will be hit when we process the payroll. Now we have our item hourly. We're going to say $15 an hour. We'll go to the taxes then up top. Within the taxes, we have to get the information that we would get from the W-4, marital status and the exemptions and so on and so forth. And then once that's set up, and again, we're not going to focus too much on the state information here. Try to not to, because the state will vary from place to place. Again, it will mirror, oftentimes many states will try to mirror what's done on the federal side of things in as they set up their state information. Here are our two employees now. If we go back to the home page, now we've got this line down here. The major payroll item is the processing of the payroll, which is pay employees. And then once that has been done, you're going to have liabilities that will be generated from the withholdings from the employees, federal income tax, Social Security, Medicare, and the employer taxes, Social Security, Medicare, and federal unemployment tax. We're not going to be focusing on federal unemployment tax at this point in time, but you'll have to pay those liabilities. You could have other liabilities too, including benefits, 401k plan, health insurance, and so on. We'll talk more about that as we process the payroll. If we went into this icon, this is what it looks like to basically process the payroll. Here are our two employees. If I was to check them off and go into the processing of the payroll, here's the calculation, the salaried payroll. Here's our information. Here's the withholdings underneath for that employee, which are not populated because we don't have the paid payroll and we would have to manually calculate them. That's why it's a manual payroll, which we'll talk about later. Here's the employer taxes on the left-hand side. We'll get into that later. If you go to the list drop-down and the payroll items, these are now all the payroll items that have been set up as we have entered the payroll information and the information for our two employees. And now we got these two more items, the hourly and the salary items now in our payroll item list.